Good morning. I would like to stand up. Maybe you can hear me better like this. I would also like to thank you for your kind words and for this interesting invitation and thought-provoking conference, I'm sure. So I will try to, combine my presentation with the PowerPoint. The title of my presentation was Three Women in the Midst of the Shoah. The Greek state was created in the early 19th century after a 9-year-long war of independence against the Ottoman Empire. From the early days of the state's existence, the Greek national identity was closely intertwined with Eastern Orthodox Christianity. Therefore, the transition from a multi-ethnic empire to a nation-state was not always easy for the Jewish population of the regions which later formed the Greek state. The Greek state inherited initially only one organized Jewish community, the Romanian community of Chalkis. You already heard some things about it from Ms. Lodaru. As a result of the territorial expansion of the Greek state during the 19th century, as well as during the early 20th, its Jewish population was considerably reinforced, but it never reached numbers of Eastern Europe or even Western sometimes. I had a small table of numbers. Imagine at its peak of pre-war Jewish population in Greece, it reached almost 70,000 people, a bit more than 1% of the total population. It was the Sephardic community of Thessaloniki, which was by far the most significant. The city became part of the Greek state during the Balkan Wars, 1912-1913. Jewish population of Thessaloniki was a vibrant and complex community, incorporating all kinds of different social groups. On the eve of World War II, the Jewish population of Greece reached almost 70,000 people, whereas more than 85% of them lived in Thessaloniki. The rest were dispersed in 26 organized communities all over Greece. The persecution of the Jews in Greece took place in two phases, mainly due to the triple occupation of the country by the Germans, the Italians, and the Bulgarians. I had a map where you could see the different zones, but let's imagine, I don't know how familiar you are with Greek geography, but let's say that the mainland was occupied by the Italians, while Thessaloniki, which is a city in the north and its surroundings, was occupied by the Germans. The northern part to the east was occupied by the Bulgarians, and practically Crete was also given to the Germans. The first phase, which spanned through the first half of 1943, included the Jews of the German and Bulgarian zone, namely Thessaloniki, Thrace, and Eastern Macedonia, while the second one, which lasted from spring to summer 1944, included Jews from the Italian zone, that basically means Western Macedonia, Epirus, Thessaly, Attica, Peloponnese, the islands of Corfu and Crete. Namely, these areas that belong to the Italian zones of occupation, and where the persecution began after the Italian capitulation in September 1943. If one focused only on the numbers of pre-war Jewish population and the fact that 86% of them were deported and or perished during the war, one would only have dealt with a part of the story of the Shoah in Greece. Although these numbers do indicate a relatively standardized and homogeneous strategy for the deportations of the Jews, they don't shed any light on the particularities of each case, each city, each community. For example, they do not provide much information about the presence of the role, if any, of the local anti-Semitism. Two opposite cases are characteristic of this argument. On the one hand, Thessaloniki, lost 96% of its pre-war Jewish population, while on the other hand, Volos, a relatively big city of central Greece, only, let's say, 26%. Needless to say that the Shoah in the different Jewish communities of the Greek state and elsewhere was largely affected by several local factors, local agents, and their own. Which zone of occupation the community belonged to, its size, the degree of its integration, as well as the different conducts of local authorities and elites. Still, even if we take all this under consideration, we still do not have the perspective of the persecuted themselves. What did it mean to be confined into a ghetto, to be deported, or to join the resistance? What kind of different survival strategies did they build? Yehuda Bauer reminds us that the victims are not passive, and thus we shouldn't treat them solely as passive recipients of their fate, but as individuals who, under immense pressure, had to make life or death decisions without necessarily realizing the full gravity of their actions. And here lies the immense importance of particular stories. They do speak volumes for a variety of things, choices, survival strategies, sentiments, etc. Most importantly, thanks to the preservation of personal stories, we are able to give voice to the victims themselves, thus also disclosing the diversity of their personalities. This is all the more important since we know that one of the most suppressive aspects of the Shoah was that the persecuted were stripped of the various characteristics of their being and brutally squeezed in only one aspect of their personality, their religious identity. Having said that, let me now present you three extraordinary stories of three Jewish women. One from Chalkida, who joined the resistance and survived, and two from Thessaloniki, who were deported to Auschwitz, but only one made it back. Sarah Yeshua, called Tsarika, was born in the Ovriaki, that's the Jewish quarter.
Sarah? What's the name again?
Sarah Yeshua. 40 is the name of her husband later. The capital of island of Evia in 1927. Her father died the same year she was born, and she was brought up by her mother, Zafira, and her older sister, Yafa, on Kotsu Street, the main street of the Jewish quarter. Her mother was the sister of a war hero, Colonel Mordocheus Frizis, who played a key role in the formation of her patriotic consciousness. When the war broke out, Sarika was a student in the public commercial school. Before she turned 15, she tended the wounded at the city's military hospital as a volunteer nurse. The next step was the resistance movement. The energetic Jewish girl secured fake identities for her mother and herself. Soon after the Germans took over the territories previously occupied by the Italians after the capitulation in September 1943, Sarika joined the EAM, National Liberation Front, the left-wing resistance movement, took her mother and left Chalkida for Steni, that's a village, mountainous village, where her sister lived with her husband. In order to protect themselves against German incursions, the resistance...
It's like a big hole.
Great. Okay. I will continue until maybe part one comes up. The resistance dispersed the Jews in various villages. Okay. And later they organized an escape network by boat to Turkey from Takei Beach. That's a beach like in the southeast part of the island. Young Sarah became a teacher in the isolated village of Kurkuli and worked actively in EPON, EAM's youth organization. After the horrific murder of her cousin Mendy Moskovich by the collaborationist security battalions in March 1944 and the burning of her village, she joined the partisan ranks. She established herself immediately as a public speaker who passionately preached armed struggle, particularly among young women. Sorry. Πιστεύετε ότι μπορούμε να...
Ναι, δώστε μου.
Ναι, okay.
Να μιλήσετε, βίντεο.
Το PowerPoint. Soon, she formed an independent female group that fought, gathered intelligence, and organized theater performances in the villages. An American journalist, who happened to be in occupied Evia, devoted a whole paragraph to her in his article about the Greek partisans. And I quote, "She's a short, stocky girl with dark hair and blue eyes. She runs like a man and can shoot a walnut from a tree at 200 yards. Whether she's calling out marching orders or pounding out a beat with her arm as her company goes singing down a mountain path, she does it vibrantly and proudly." End of quote. At the liberation, she commanded the model women's platoon of the 7th Elas was the military arm of the resistance movement, regiment, and her reputation was this of a living legend, especially among the partisans of Evia, under the nom de guerre Kapitanissa Sarika. She still lives in Tel Aviv. No. Okay, that's okay.
Everything is turning on.
Just saying. You would see her holding a gun. We have a very beautiful picture of her. Amazing. Sarika.
What's her name today?
Sarah Yeshua. The same day. 40, it's Sarah Yeshua 40, it's her husband's name. Second story. No? Oh, okay. Neama Kazes. Neama Kazes was born in 1889 as the daughter of Abraham and Mazatov Gibre. Her husband, Yehuda Kazes, died in 1935. Her family in Komotini, that's northern East Greece, and their two sons, Maurice and Alberto, had been born there in 1911 and 1916, respectively. A few years later, they moved to Thessaloniki. Maurice was recruited in the Greco-Italian War and was distinguished for his courage. Returning from the front, he found his mother in Athens. However, on 18 September 1941, Neama... Sarika! There she is. Can we show the next? No. That's Neama. Μπορούμε να κλείσουμε τα φώτα εδώ κάπως για να μήπως να φαίνονται λίγο καλύτερα. Great. So this is Neama. On your left side, it's a map of Thessaloniki. The black areas are the areas of the Jewish quarters that practically became small ghettos in early 1943. And that's the only picture you see here. That's the only picture that we know from the transfer of Jews to the Baron Hirsch ghetto, the main transit camp for the deportations to Auschwitz. So, on 18 September 1941, Neama went back to Thessaloniki for a few days to find and bring back food, but she was trapped there. At first, she lived with Alberto, who managed to leave Thessaloniki in February 1943, just a bit before the deportation started. Despite the efforts of both her sons to bring their mother in Athens, Neama was arrested. She was deported to Auschwitz, where she was murdered. While trapped in the ghetto, Neama sent a series of letters to her sons in Athens. Here is an excerpt from the last letter she wrote on early April 1943, just a few days before her deportation. This is a copy of the letters that we hold at the Jewish Museum of Greece. It's written in French, and I translated it into English. These days I'm writing to you a letter of reassurance, despite the anguish, morning and night of waiting like convicts the death penalty. In a few days or in a few hours, the fatal moment will arrive for me as well. My dearest children, despite my efforts not to worry you, I see that my final moments have arrived. As God sees my tears, let Him show mercy and protect you. You should live, happily if you can. May God protect you from all evil. May God protect you from all evil is my every night prayer. Nothing can describe the tragedy that is happening here. What hope do I give myself to resist? Me, who expected to see you in every moment. I ran with a bag on my back to an unknown direction unprotected. Do not forget me, my dear children, my loved ones. You are the only reason I'm still alive. I wish I could. I wish God would give me this hope to see you again, to kiss you, to see your eyes for which I spent my youth, always hoping to spend happy days with you. The third story. Lisa Mano was born in Thessaloniki in 1916 to a wealthy Salonican Jewish family. She was the daughter of Yeshua Yosef Mano, a tobacco merchant, and Mazel Tov, a member of the Bohor Matarasso family, fifth amongst 9 siblings. Lisa demonstrated early on her business acumen, and in 1942 she opened her own fur products and wholesale store at 35 Tsimiski Street in the city center. On the 2nd July of 1939, she married Dario Solomon Pinchas, a businessman. Soon after the deportation of the Jews from Thessaloniki began, the entire family was arrested and taken to the Baron-Hirsch ghetto until their deportation to Auschwitz-Birkenau in April 1943. Lisa, alongside with her younger sister Marie, remained in Auschwitz for a year and a half, enduring all kinds of mental and physical torture. Once the Germans evacuated the camp, they were taken on a death march with stops at the Ravensbrück and Reckling concentration camps. Before being finally liberated on 30 April 1945. Later, Lisa wrote down her memoirs, recording her experiences during these years, the long journey home, and the loss of more than 100 relatives in the camps. Out of Lisa's immediate family, it was only herself and her 2 younger sisters, Marie and Adele, who had escaped to Athens, that survived. Immediately upon their return, Lisa settled back in Thessaloniki, where she waited for 2 years for her husband to return. At some point, she got the information that he had been murdered in Auschwitz. Yet, Lisa never remarried. The agony she went through to record her tragic memories of the camp, but also to try and seek compensation for the survivors, was evident to all surviving members of her family. To this end, she established the Union for the Relief and Rehabilitation of Thessaloniki Jews, which was based in the Modiano market in an office donated by the Jewish community of Thessaloniki. In the position of the Secretary General, Lisa Pinchas also represented the city's organization of survivors at various fora and events worldwide. You see her there, dedicating the rest of her life to this task. Her exceptional memoirs were published by the Jewish Museum of Greece in 3 languages in 2004: English, French, and Greek. I chose this small passage to read from her memoirs that I believe it captures a certain moment of women's solidarity and how much of a physical but also mental challenge was the confinement into a death camp. I was working in Auschwitz in the Union fabric, which manufactured ammunition, when I met Annie, a young Dutch girl. She had just arrived in our commando after having had an operation in which they removed her genitals. Her nervous system was strongly shaken. She was more badly treated than anyone else, continuously threatened with being sent to the crematorium for the slightest reason, which made her mental state worse and worse. She used to be so sweet and good. I can still hear her say to me, "Lisa, I can feel that I'm not very normal. I swear to you, I wasn't like this before the operation. I'm afraid to see my husband after the war. He will pity me, if he even recognizes me, and I don't want that. Lisa, do you think that I will get better later? Otherwise, I'm better off dying. You must understand me. My husband loved me so much. If I disappeared, I would remain the young woman that he adored in his memories. Isn't that right?" "My poor friend," says Lisa. "She was a saint for saying these things. I would hold her tightly, with compassion, and try to comfort her and calm her agitated heart with words. But her words echoed in my heart. Unintentionally, I thought of my husband for whom I was everything, and then I thought about what I was at that moment. This idea tormented me too, and tears ran down my face, silently and abundantly. Annie died at Reckling camp in Germany." So, what do these stories tell us about the history of the Shoah in Greece, or in general? They completely discredit, in my view, the perspective of those persecuted seen solely as victims, solely as people who were deprived of their choices, their freedom, their dignity, and their life. Sarika chose to join the partisans and wandered from village to village to recruit young girls to fight the Germans. Naama chose to realize and write down what was going on around her. She chose to say her final goodbyes to her children. Lisa chose to comfort her friend when and where there was no comfort. Three completely different choices with one thing in common: unimaginable courage. Thank you.